go very fast.
Talk is given by Smajlundagard, G3GJW. Yep. Somebody I remember from the 1950s.
Oh, you are young.
Yeah, can't help it. Just blame a hair smudge.
Right, an official good evening. When I was thinking about this, I thought, well, crikey, I can't do this in a logical manner like a book which takes you year by year and we say what we did and why we did it and so on. It of necessity has to be a bit subjective. I came out of the army having done my national service in 1948, and my father played snooker with a chap in the Greyhound in Eltham High Street called Pescud. And his son, Don Pescud, had been a AG, wireless operator, air gunner in the RAF in the Eastern Med and in Greece during the war. And I came out with a knee that had been kicked by a horse rather thankfully. It's now a clockwork one. And I wasn't leaping around for about 10 years. And he said, why don't you walk round and have a word with this chap? Don Pescud had built a shed, which was about 2/3 the size of this. You had to be good friends for the two of you to sort of get in the shed at the same time. On one end he had the working gear, on the other hand he destroyed perfectly good equipment doing what he called modifications. And Don took me along as a guest then in 1948 for the first time to Crave Valley. So all the people listed here being founders and all that stuff, I've known them all. When I first came, I was very much the new boy. I didn't get my license until January 1950, and I had passed my RAE, I knew that in August. I'd done my CW in October, and in those days you waited about 3 months before they actually issued the necessary license. So Don took me along. I think he had to pay a shilling a time to bring me in. And when in December I volunteered to pay my subscription for 1950, you know, a year in advance, they held an extraordinary general meeting in Crave Valley, and they turned down my money because you had to be a transmitting member to become a full member. So I felt about that big. Right, we met at Lammerby Park in those days, and I couldn't understand a word of what they were talking about, because they were all talking in this peculiar jargon. Q-code I knew Q-code inside out and back to front from my army days, but they were talking about mopers and things like that, and I thought, what on earth's a moper? It's a master oscillator PA, of course. You knew that, of course. I was an operator in the army. I had no theory at all. I wasn't in the least bit interested in that, because I've always mentally divided people into operators and technicians. And I only used CW during my army time, and it was exclusively cipher, and most of it was under mobile conditions with a 1/4-inch gap, bouncing about in the back of a car with 25 watts of very crude equipment, which is a museum piece these days. Anyway, along I came. Now, what was the scene in those days? Well, the scene was really surplus equipment so far as receivers were concerned, but build your own when it came to transmitters. The first decent transmitter I ever saw rack-mounted was G2CXO, Jeff Miles, an exceptionally nice chap who went on to become a man in Perth. And he was a very good friend of G3JJX, who lived in Sidcup, subsequently emigrated to Perth and is retired there as VK6AJ. A very keen man on 10 metres and an ex-FOC CW member, because he fell out with the hierarchy. He thought they were too snooty. But if you talk to him, you're talking to a local lad who lived just literally around the corner in Sidcup. The meetings were, as they are now, they're very interested, varied. You had all sorts of talents. Virtually all of us had been through the services, and everyone had a tale to tell, not all of whom wanted to tell them. I mean, we had people who'd been through GCHQ, we had people who'd been dropped in France, we had all sorts of people in the membership here in this club. And, you know, they just didn't like talking about it. But it meant that they were very capable operators. They'd operated a voice, a phone, in all the services across the world. They'd been all around the world. If they would sort of talk off the record a little bit, it was quite fascinating. So I got my licence on the 25th of January, and the very first person I ever spoke to was G3 AMK. In those days, you were allowed 25 watts, and it had to be crystal controlled, and I used a borrowed G or V2 transmitter. I didn't have the receiver, which belonged to G3AQT, who'd helped me get through the exam. Unfortunately, is old and not really with it in Ashford these days. Both of us lived in Nottingham at the time. It was a great struggle working anybody then. I had one crystal, and it cost 7 shillings and 6pence, and I thought, God, that's a lot of money. That is a lot of money. I was looking at my old logs today, and the 6 log books that I had covering the 10 years, 50 to 60, and there were some pages on which I hadn't got a single QSO at all. And gradually it picked up. Gradually you cottoned on how to load antennas properly. It wasn't a case of just banging in higher power or switching to a phone. The only phone we knew in those days, of course, was AM. G2CXO had been living with his mother-in-law down in Mottingham Lane in Nottingham, and he had built himself on her dining room table, would you believe, a 6-foot rack set up, which was the first one I ever saw. There were some absolutely beautiful bits and pieces built by the lads in those days. We had field days, of course. We were restricted to 10 watts, and whilst we tended to use commercial surplus receivers, because amateur ones from America were beyond our means to buy, there were only the few that had sort of been used by the services and had filtered through, and they were like gold dust. But we homebrewed all the transmitters, and some of our guys, like 8PT and particularly 3MZ, who worked for GEC, built absolutely professional class stuff. They were really like commercial prototypes. You can't say that they were inferior in any way to anything you could go and buy these days. Dickie Bird probably is unknown to you. He invented a compact antenna